It all started surprisingly unusually, with a similar feeling. This was the first time the guy had seen this site, but despite this, the guy had a strange feeling of nostalgia. And then he realized that this feeling was not the first time he'd been haunted by it, but the reasons for this were unclear. Throughout his life, the guy often encountered this feeling, so he didn't even know how many times it was. He felt like he had been living here since birth, and this feeling. Mr. Jeffrey Vanrage was called and was surprised, but immediately looked up. Having apologized for the delay, the man at the computer asked the guy whether he had come to register with the guild or not. Mr. Jeffrey answered affirmatively that he came specifically for registration. The registrant began to type all the information into the computer, and there was an awkward pause. But the guy continued to be haunted by thoughts that he had already met this girl in the past. While he was thinking about this, the work with his questionnaire was finished, and now he can see his window. And at that very moment, something resembling a game panel began to appear in front of the guy's face. The window kept saying that I was registering as an adventurer, and to complete the authentication I had to wave my right hand. Something changed in Jeffrey's head. His gaze became different, and it was as if an epiphany had come. Looking at the information in the system window, he began to understand where this strange feeling of déjà vu came from. He remembered everything and looked closely at his hand, thereby beginning to attract attention. The girl at the registration desk asked Mr. Vanrage if everything was okay. Memories of his past campaigns began to appear in his head in huge numbers. At that time, he explored this world following the orders of the squad commander. He also loved to relax with his guild friends in the tavern after a wonderful day at work. But this place was actually a game that the guy played for a long time and even began to call him a professional. He entered the world of the game Grand 7. It was a fantasy kingdom-style game. And the adventurers were people who traveled across all 7 continents for the sake of peace between countries. But despite this, Jeffrey was not very happy and could not understand what was happening and why these memories appeared right now. He was a simple young man who dreamed of becoming an adventurer because he just wanted money to feed his family. And now, the world in which he was born and raised was just a game that he loved to play in his past life. Although, after thinking it over again, he realized that this was simply an ideal opportunity. The girl kept asking Jeffrey if everything was okay, and all because he was shaking so much. The guy immediately began to apologize for the inconvenience caused. He really didn't want to make anyone worry about him. Despite his shocked state, he was simply burning with impatience to get to the mission as soon as possible. But he still didn't understand why his memories had awakened right now, continuing to search for the answer in his head. The authentication notification was still hanging in front of his eyes. Raising his hand to the screen and about to complete the registration, the guy began to realize that with the help of all his knowledge, he could get high. The full stats appeared before him. He was 19 years old, flexible, but his attention to detail left much to be desired. The girl shyly wished him good luck and a safe journey in his research. Immediately, a portal appeared in front of Jeffrey, into which he began to move. Immediately before his eyes appeared a beautiful view of small peninsulas floating in the air. There was no limit to his amazement at such beauty. The first rays of the sun were so bright that they even blinded him a little. Jeffrey continued to look around and examine everything in more detail. Here a notification appeared in front of him, informing him that the player had entered the baptismal altar. He understood that everything really looked like a location from a game that he had recently remembered. Here his gaze was drawn to what was happening to his side, and he decided to check what was happening. According to his recollections, 5 new adventurers were gathered in this place. Each of them was individual, and this was the place of distribution. And while all the people looked around and watched everyone who was there, the guy understood that all the events were really repeating themselves. Everyone who ended up here was extremely diverse and different from each other. But now it had become his reality, which meant that he no longer had a self-preservation function. So if he dies, he will not be resurrected. But with these memories and skillful use of them, he will quickly become a great adventurer. Then a notification was heard that the baptism ceremony would begin in 30 minutes and asked to prepare your weapons. Jeffrey realized that each stage corresponded to the stages he had gone through in the game. At this time, complete chaos began. Everyone was running somewhere, competing. Only one guy stood still. Someone tried to control the process of choosing weapons and make it so that they would be chosen one by one. The weapons were of various types. There were spears, swords, and bows. Battles began over some type of weapon. At the moment, it was a spear with a long handle. The Guardian Spear was an E+ rank, with an attack power of 21 and a durability of 50-50. The fight was very fierce, and they argued about who was the first to take this spear in their hands. Someone immediately liked the sword despite the fact that its characteristics were lower. Namely, the red sword's rank was E, its attack power was 19, and its durability was 60 to 60. But more than one person liked this sword, and someone decided to take it away by force by hitting the guy who was first in the face. Only Genfrey calmly waited for what would come his way and did not get involved in these conflicts that occurred every time. This was a system of forced choice of profession. At baptism, a choice of professions for training was given, but it was limited. Newbies always tried to choose a stronger profession, but Genfrey always approached the choice wisely and responsibly. Some were happy about their victory in this choice, while others were unhappy with someone else's victory in an unfair fight. But many went further and began to brag, thinking that they had taken the best of what was possible, declaring this to everyone's praise, to which Genfrey responded without much enthusiasm, which most likely led to misunderstanding of the guy with the best profession in his opinion. The warrior thought that this guy was just an unknown upstart and was angry with him. The guy walked past the weapons and thought about which weapon he should choose. Here he made a decision and began to move more confidently towards his goal. He stopped near the most unremarkable dagger. This dagger was unremarkable in any way, and most likely its characteristics also left much to be desired. This was true because the normal dagger was EF rank. The attack power was only 1 and the durability was 90 to 90. That same warrior began to mock the choice of a dagger with an attack of 1 unit and said how he would not regret his choice in the future. In his mind, Genfrey knew that a sane adventurer would hardly take such a weapon, but he knew that the concept of common sense was distorted here. The opinion of ordinary extras did not apply to real people, and so he chose the ordinary dagger. Then they heard the announcement of the start of the baptism, and it was reported that they had 5 minutes. And then monsters that looked like huge wasps began to appear, and these 5 minutes were given precisely to kill as many of these creatures as possible. Genfrey knew that this species only appeared in the altar location, namely the honey centipede. The poison of these monsters could paralyze anyone, which was even more dangerous. The warrior immediately told Genfrey to try not to die and called him a kid. His face was filled with hatred, but where did it come from? Genfrey also did not understand such hatred towards him, but decided to ignore these antics. The announcement of the start of the baptism was heard and the honey centipedes rushed to attack. The monsters began to fly closer and closer, but the guy found his advantage in this. He realized that the behavior remained exactly the same as it was in the game, which means that the weak points remained the same. And Genfrey began to notice more and more places that could help him kill the honey centipede. The monster also did not intend to wait for the guy to attack and rush towards him. But it wasn't that simple because you shouldn't underestimate anyone in such battles. Taking out his dagger, he was very confident in his mind for a grand attack, and with one confident, strong blow, he pounced on the centipede and did not even take any further action. After all, one blow was more than enough to kill the monster. He didn't even wait for the outcome of the battle and moved on. A notification appeared stating that the honey centipede had been defeated. Everyone who was at the same location was shocked by this outcome of events, because he had the weakest weapon. Genfrey just happily reported that it was a direct hit and moved on. The warrior told him that it was very good, but in his mind he could not understand how he managed to do it with one blow. But the guy knew that in every game there is a bug, just like in this one. But he only worked in this location. It consisted of the fact that if you hit the honey centipede's weak spot with an ordinary dagger, continuing to fight the monsters, Genfrey understood that he would go far in this battle. Another honey centipede was also defeated with one blow. After all, the essence of the bug was that with the help of a regular dagger, a blow to a weak spot would kill the monster, and the most important thing is that only he knew about it. For many, dealing with the centipede was a challenge despite the strength of their weapons. Some people set themselves the goal of simply killing at least one monster, but fear also overcame each of them. Someone could still attack the monsters and even quite successfully. They actually received the coveted achievements that the honey centipede was destroyed. But the most disgusting thing about these people was their extraordinary boasting. Everyone looked at him as if he were a fool, because he wasted precious time bragging. Genfrey thought that this was definitely not the time to shout, because it would attract attention. One of the honey centipedes thought it had caught a good moment to attack and rushed forward. But the guy, expecting this, dodged the monster's attack just in time, pretending that it was just an accident. The next moment he also managed to successfully dodge, but this time not without fear in his eyes. As he began to take out his dagger, a smile began to spread across his face, and all because he thought that it was much more interesting here than in the game. He waited for further actions from the centipede and was in no hurry, because he understood that the main thing was to react in time. And as soon as I heard the flight, I prepared to attack, but the centipede stopped for a second, as if thinking about something. Genfrey, however, did not lose his composure at this moment and launched a counterattack. Once again, a notification appeared about the victory over the honey centipede. The happy guy looked back at everyone who was also with him at that moment, because the baptism ceremony was over. It was announced that the profession would be awarded based on skills shown in battle, and battle statistics appeared in front of each participant. The number of killed was 7, and 3 professions were offered to choose from, namely hunter, potion maker, and shieldman. The guys stood and talked about how few murders they had committed, because they were unable to obtain the professions they desired for this reason. Someone stood trembling. For himself, he was unbearable because he could not do anything in this battle. Namely, because there was absolutely not a single murder, the registration for the adventurer was not completed, and further selection was impossible. Here the deafening laughter of the swordsman was heard, because he had done what he thought was a huge number of monster kills. Namely, he killed as many as 15 centipedes, and the professions offered were fighter, thief, hunter, and swordsman, which the guy dreamed of so much. But then his gaze caught on the nearby Genfrey, who was thinking hard about his choice of profession. But he stood thoughtfully and did not shout about his achievements, since he approached the choice in this world with understanding. And the swordsman decided to ask himself about his achievements and what professions he had been given. Genfrey was surprised by such impudence, but ignored the question. But the swordsman himself noticed the choice that was presented, and his shock was enormous. He couldn't even understand when the guy had done so much and just froze in anticipation. After all, the number of centipedes he killed was 33, and the number of professions to choose from was 10. Every profession that was possible was available to Genfrey, which shocked the swordsman even more. But he decided not to be too upset, because at least he was able to become a swordsman, and the guy congratulated him on this. He knew that with 15 kills, the probability of a drop was about 2%. In this game, the most powerful professions were swordsman and summoner, so Genfrey was unsure what to choose. But he came to a conclusion and clicked on what he liked best. The system reported that the profession was successfully selected. It was also reported that everyone will be provided with basic equipment according to their choice of specialty. Genfrey immediately acquired a new look in terms of clothing, and the system reported that his new profession was potion maker. Everyone who also qualified was shocked by this choice on the part of the guy. After all, for many people this was incomprehensible. This profession was not the highest and seemed idiotic to everyone. But Genfrey simply ignored such statements directed at him. The system informed him that his profession was level 1 potion maker and his skill was synthesis. But he definitely knew something more and was already preparing to open the inventory. After all, this bad profession was revealed only in the hands of a very experienced player. It wasn't for nothing that he killed so many people. He got something out of it after all. Namely, he got 5 stings, 9 wings, and 3 blood from the honey centipede. After all, such items could only drop in this location, and he also took the dagger into his inventory. He decided to immediately apply everything that was given to him in this location and test his profession. Synthesis was expressed in the combination of any objects and their improvement. He continues to synthesize all the items that he managed to obtain. Magic was happening before our eyes. The profession was initially chosen to create something special. Everyone who was nearby did not understand at all what Genfrey was doing. It was he who created weapons capable of destroying this world. The synthesis was completely completed, as the system nobly reported. Everything was ready, and Genfrey's happiness knew no bounds. He was now the strongest in this universe. The weapon called Centipede had an attack power of 66. The rank was unknown. Durability was 1.5 to 1,500, and the first skill was Perception, which dealt triple damage to vulnerable points. The strength of an adventurer was determined by his job and level. Equipment was just a tool for defense and attack. In this world, there were special types of equipment that manifested themselves regardless of profession or level. They were called hidden weapons. Genfrey arrived on the first continent, which was a city of rookie adventurers called Logobigin. The city was ablaze with joyful faces, and the market was bustling with trade. In such markets, one could find not only food, but also weapons and various useful artifacts. Genfrey was very happy to finally reach the first continent and believed that nothing had changed in this place. Then a girl came up to him and offered to try an apple, which the guy was not going to refuse. Standing at the wall of the building, he began to think about his further plan because he had already received a profession and a weapon. The goal of this game was simple. Each of the continents had S-class dungeons, and the player's task was to kill all the bosses on the 7 continents. But to do this, he needed to become stronger, and the guy decided to go into the dungeon. The dungeons were also divided into ranks, and, as a rule, everyone started from the lowest, namely rank F. But Genfrey confidently headed towards a higher rank portal, namely a C rank portal. The dungeon was called the Forest Where the Guardians Live. The main condition for the cleanup was defeating the main boss. Genfrey received a notification that the dungeon entrance was complete, but another notification appeared informing him that he would not be able to return until he fulfilled the conditions of the purge. Arriving at his destination, he looked very closely at what was happening. No one had ever taken such a big risk. Genfrey came here at level 1. His health was intact, his physical strength was 21, his defense was 27, his intelligence was 30, his agility was 19, and his luck was 11. The recommended level for clearing a C-rank dungeon was between 17 and 30, so there was nothing for a beginner to do here. And the guy decided to check if these places were as dangerous as everyone said. Then a devil plant appeared in front of him, which was level 17. Having summoned the centipede, he understood that the difference in levels was 16, and this was of course frightening, but not so much. He was ready to fight and was almost ready to attack. Genfrey understood that despite the difference in levels, one blow would be enough for him to end this battle. The devil plant was ready to attack and the system reported it. Despite the fact that he was very fast, the guy knew all his attacks by heart. And he also knew the most important thing, namely his weak spot. It was a bud, and with one beautiful blow he attacked right into it. By delivering a precise blow to the weak point of the devil plant, the perception skill was activated. At the same moment, the system reported that the monster had been defeated. Genfrey was pleased with the work done, and it was not for nothing that he remembered all this in his past life. The system started reporting a huge upgrade and level increased to 10th. The guy was amazed at such a high upgrade for one monster. In this game, health and mana points increased automatically, and status points also appeared. Genfrey decided that he had enough strength for now, and it was better for him to put all his status points into defense, increasing it to 72. The guy was extremely grateful to his dagger, because he was able to do all this only with its help. The attack power at the moment was 66, and the guy could easily clear a B-rank dungeon. But Genfrey knew that the potential of his weapon would only be revealed over time, and was looking forward to this moment. The guy decided that it was too early for him to go to the boss, and he would go on to level up further. The weather outside was beautiful at this time, and all that was left was to wait for a new monster to appear. Here, Genfrey noticed some strange movement next to him and began to peer. 3 level 23rd and 24 noir snakes appeared next to him. It was a mid-level dungeon monster, rank C, and the probability of encountering 3 snakes was 1%. Then one of the snakes attacked Genfrey, and he was not prepared for its attack. But, at the last moment, he managed to dodge and jump away from this attack. The guy realized that they remained just as fierce as they were in the game. One of the snakes rushed at him again and pushed him in the back. 2 snakes were already attacking the guy non-stop, and all he could do was run. He understood that the first thing he needed to do was pull himself together and remember the previous battle. Genfrey remembered the weak point of the Serpent Noir and was ready to attack. He immediately jumped off the ground with all his might. As he flew upwards, he realized that there was soft tissue in the neck area and he needed to pierce it. In order for the snake to be dealt triple damage, it was necessary to hit this spot with one attack. His blade was almost at its target, but then something unexpected happened. At that very moment, the second snake appeared nearby and protected its fellow from the blow. Genfrey didn't understand how this was possible because he had never seen such protection from his brothers before. The third snake immediately rushed forward and attacked the shocked guy, biting him on the shoulder. A piercing pain struck him and he didn't know what to do in such a situation. But immediately grabbing his dagger, he decided that he had to fight back the monster. The blade left only a barely noticeable shimmer as it was struck with incredible speed. He was already falling down at great speed along with the monster's head, which was hanging by its teeth on his shoulder. Having torn this head away from himself, he tried to stop the bleeding. The system reported that the level 23 snake had been defeated and the level had risen to 13. Health was at 8, status was near death. The system demanded to leave the danger zone and heal. Genfrey expected such an outcome. But the guy was not so simple, and he even foresaw this outcome of events. This is exactly why he pumped all his points into defense at level 10, because despite such losses he did not die. But why did Genfrey neglect his health so much? Everything was done to activate the second skill of the centipede. Genfrey made one sharp movement and attacked. The centipede's second skill was Divine Speed, which increased agility tenfold when the user was on the verge of death. So in one blow, both the 23rd and 24th level snakes fell. The system also reported that both snakes were defeated. The guy sarcastically stated that he had no intention of dying so easily. The level was also raised to 17. It was a very difficult battle despite such extraordinary weapons. Genfrey understood that despite the good leveling up, he almost died. He understood that it was better for him to restore his health, but he also understood that the skill would stop working. Genfrey still didn't want to give up such a bonus and decided that he could hold out a little longer. But as he started to get up, he realized that it wasn't worth taking such a risk. The forest was in ruins. This was a battle of enormous proportions. Here, an unusually scary monster appeared, ready to attack the guy. But before it could appear, the guy's blade flew past. Genfrey landed next to the monster. He knew that this could happen and was prepared for such an outcome. With the centipede's second skill, it was indeed very easy to defeat low-level monsters. And this meant that the pumping would go much faster, and after killing the boss, Genfrey would be able to apply the new synthesis. To obtain this synthesis, certain products were required, namely water and thorny grass, as well as a large bunch of blueberries, a caterpillar, and skullcap leaves. But that was not the whole list, because a bloody flower and a chestnut seed were still needed. Synthesizing a D-rank item required a huge amount of ingredients. It felt like cooking in real life, but sometimes monsters spoiled such fun and reflection. But Genfrey understood that such grumbling would not help the main task. He decided that he would gradually collect everything, but before meeting with the boss. The guy gradually moved through the dungeon and observed the local beauty. He already had a bloody flower in his hands, as well as thorny grass. He also found a bush on which perhaps grew what was needed for synthesis. It really was blueberries, and he was even surprised at how quickly the collection of the necessary products was going. While looking at the blueberries, he heard someone call out to him. He immediately turned around at the mention of his name and could not understand who it was. Two guys appeared in front of him, exploring the same area, and were discussing that one of those who came was from the same village as him. The guy was sarcastic and said that he didn't believe that such a loser decided to become an adventurer. Genfrey was surprised that the guy had become an adventurer 2 or 3 years ago and was still walking through dungeons like this. Julius continued to taunt about guns and his choice of profession, calling it crap, and his partner was surprised that they knew each other. He decided to explain that Genfrey's family was the poorest in the village, and the guy had been strange all his life and shouldn't be paid attention to. He was hurt by the words about the family and the situation they were in. Genfrey understood that the situation was really not the best because his younger sister was still taking care of their mother, and he became an adventurer in order to earn money. But these two guys were not going to leave him alone, and they tried to get his attention. Julius was shocked by this behavior and said that he could easily beat the guy up. Grabbing Genfrey's collar, he thought about what was best to do with him. But then a very loud roar was heard, driving each of the three to the brink of shivers. They immediately looked around and began to search with their eyes for the one who was making such sounds. Then the third guy noticed this monster and tried to shout to everyone. The dungeon boss, a level 31 Cyclops, appeared before them. Julius immediately yelled at his partner that they shouldn't just stand around and need to run immediately. But Genfrey stopped them and said that the guy had already become his target and it would be best to put up a fight for him. Here the Cyclops began to swing something like a club at the guy with a wild growl. The guy was shocked by how strong the blow was, and that this blow caused damage that was much more than the guy's health. Julius fell in panic at what he saw and could not understand how this could happen. Cyclops noticed this behavior and found a new target for himself. The Cyclops' skill was the all-seeing eye, and it was indeed a very dangerous battle. Genfrey knew that if he hesitated, he could end up like that guy. But the boss's defense was very strong. It remained to be seen how to break through this defense, but the monster was ready to attack again. Swinging at the guy, he didn't get hit by the attack despite his speed. Cyclops lost sight of him, and that was a fitting outcome. The Cyclops' skill was that he focused all his attention on just one target and attacked only that one. The system reported that Genfrey had become the monster's target. The next message stated that because of the all-seeing eye, not a single prey could escape him. Genfrey had no choice but to accept this battle. Cyclops was preparing for another attack heading towards the guy. But this attack also failed, and all because Genfrey knew all the attacks in advance and was able to dodge them thanks to his divine speed. Julius could only watch in shock as the battle progressed. He couldn't understand how Genfrey could rise to such a level so quickly. But the guy understood that if he continued running like that, he wouldn't be able to beat him. and then he decided that it was time for him to attack. He immediately jumped onto the Cyclops' makeshift club and raced up it. He moved higher and higher along the tree trunk, straight towards the body of the monster itself. Cyclops could not expect such behavior from his opponent, and even hesitated a little in his actions. At one point, he even tried to grab the guy, but Jenfrey managed to jump out of the monster's palm. The guy jumped so high that he towered over the Cyclops by several meters. The monster's weak point was its neck, and at the moment it was exposed. Jenfrey was ready to make a spin attack at that point. Cyclops still couldn't understand where his target had disappeared. Jenfrey flew towards the monster with great determination, sure of its weak spot. The Cyclops tried with all his might to find his target around him. But then the guy realized that the situation was developing exactly as he had assumed. After all, not a drop of damage passed through the monster, which means that it simply showed its location. Despite knowing the weak spot, it remained completely untouched. Cyclops at that moment noticed the presence of his target and prepared a plan of attack. The next second, a club made from a torn tree was already flying at Jenfrey. But noticing this in time, he managed to jump away from the monster's back at the last second. The guy only understood that with such a difference in levels it would be very difficult for him to fight. At this time, Julius was hiding under the leaves of fallen trees and could not understand whether he had once known this man. At this time, Jenfrey tried with all his might and means to fight the boss. His friend from the village did not understand where such speed came from and suspected that it could be a buff. The guy at this time was running away from another attack from the monster. Jenfrey understood that he needed time and opportunity to create a new thing. Despite the fact that some ingredients had already been collected, the missing ones were also in the same clearing. He had no opportunity to pick them up, and it was all because of the boss who was constantly watching him and attacking him. But then he noticed that everything he was missing was right next to Julius, and the guy immediately ran to his old friend in order to collect all of it, which scared him a lot. He simply knocked out his comrade and revealed his location. Immediately, Jenfrey received a notification that skull jelly leaves, a chestnut seed, and a caterpillar had been added to her inventory. And to complete it, he needed one last ingredient, which was water. Having jumped into the stream, the system reported that the last ingredient had been obtained. At that moment, he accepted the synthesis spell. And standing in the stream, the synthesis of all the collected ingredients began to take place. A vial of E-rank poison appeared in front of him, which had the effect of entering the body, decreasing health every second. Julius tried to shout and tell the guy that the Cyclops had a high resistance to poisons, and his poison, even if it wasn't of a low rank, wouldn't work. But Jenfrey knew that anyway. At that time, he was holding in his hands the spinal fluid of a C-rank noir snake, which he wanted to synthesize with ordinary poison, and that's what he did everything for. And by using synthesis, a completely different substance of a higher rank appeared before him. A powerful D-rank poison was in front of him, and the effect of this poison had increased from the previous one, which meant that his health would be significantly reduced with each passing second. Julius was shocked, because before this he had never seen one object synthesized twice. But his plan was much more specific, and he cast the spell again, synthesizing this poison with his blade for greater effect and strengthening the blade itself. At that moment, the friend from the village could hardly utter a word because of the shock. The system immediately reported that the centipede had received a poisonous attribute. Jenfrey believed that this was the true power of his weapon. Julius only thought that this was almost impossible, because he used synthesis 3 times and was able to discover a new attribute. Then a Cyclops appeared behind the guy who was surprised by Jenfrey's abilities. The guy immediately apologized to the monster and asked for clarification about the start of the second round. The Cyclops was already very close to Jenfrey and ready to attack at the right opportunity, immediately directing his club along the trajectory of the guy's run. The battle continued, and it seemed to be moving very fast. But Jenfrey was just as fast and no longer intended to hide from the attacks, but instead directly repelled them. And now he was already at the level of the monster's head. The guy understood that the body clearly remembered all the movements of the Cyclops. The monster only had time to notice how the guy was already almost on his back. Jenfrey immediately began to chop the monster's body with quick movements. Continuing to do this, he just waited for the moment when he would receive a notification from the system. Then it came and reported that the Cyclops had been given a severe poisoning status, and his health would be significantly reduced with each second. But the monster immediately used his skill and removed all the poison from his body. Jenfrey decided to inflict poison with every hit. He continued to inflict injuries on the Cyclops. Messages about poisoning applied to a monster. But he kept an eye on his target and continued to use his skill. And just as instantly, he removed all the poison from his body. Genfrey kept attacking and was surprised at such a quick recovery. Despite the fact that reports of poisoning continued to come in, Cyclops immediately used his skill and underwent recovery, which the system reported every second. But he, the guy, continued to deliver poisoned attacks. The status of severe poisoning was imposed once again, but Genfrey knew that he would still be able to freeze the Cyclops with these frequent attacks. Now it was time to begin the main attack. He was already prepared for an attack that suspected piercing the eyeball was a key part of defeating the Cyclops. After all, the main weak point was the eye. Due to the precise attack on the main point, the perception skill worked. The Cyclops immediately fell to his knees and spots appeared on his legs, announcing his evaporation. Genfrey jumped off the falling body of the monster and was clearly tired. The system immediately reported that he had been awarded experience points and the Cyclops had been defeated. Julius was shocked by this outcome of events, only because until the very end he did not believe in this victory. He couldn't imagine that the guy he knew was actually standing in front of him. The boys met eyes and something like an awkward spark passed between them. Julius only managed to run away with a request not to kill him. But Genfrey was surprised by such behavior. Putting away his weapon, he thought about what was more important for him to pump out now. His health was critically low, his level also rose to level 23, and his agility was increased due to the skill. He decided that for now he would not upgrade anything until he had accumulated 90 points and closed the status window, but opened the inventory. The reward for defeating the boss was 350,000 gold, and a rank D Cyclops Fang was also added to the inventory. Having received a huge amount of gold, he decided to send half to his mother. He thought that it was comfortable for him to play alone and not have to share anything with anyone, but that was not what he came here for. The main target was the C-rank Cyclops Eye, which could be sold for a very good price. Genfrey was amused by the fact that this eye looked completely unpresentable and closed the inventory. He knew that he had one last ingredient left to create a new weapon. He went to the flat plane, which was a D-rank dungeon. Genfrey reached his destination because he remembered this dungeon very well. He decided to relax a little and think. For every player, the main goal was to defeat every boss on all continents. But first, it's worth dealing with the first of them. He came to him in order to get a new weapon that was kept by the angel. To solve the mystery of the fallen goddess, the Eye of the Cyclops and one more item were needed, for which he came here. But new monsters had already appeared and noticed his presence. They immediately rushed to attack Genfrey, which was just training for him. His goal was to cleanse the world of monsters and achieve a peaceful existence for people, and also provide your family with everything they need for a good life. He promised to shut the mouth of anyone who previously did not believe in his abilities as soon as he became stronger, and he was determined to achieve his goals. He was constantly gaining experience points and increasing his level. The city was in turmoil. An urgent meeting of the Adventurers Association was called, the main character of which was a newbie who defeated a level 33 monster. This was the main event. They also received information that this guy's name was Genfrey, and everyone was shocked at how he was able to do such a thing. Everyone also received information about what this guy looked like, and the loudspeaker also announced the transition to other news. Some group of adventurers was arrested for excessive hunting of cobalt birds, and there was not enough information about this group. Genfrey continued to explore the dungeon and kill small monsters. The main oddity was that he walked all day but did not meet the one he was looking for. He collected a huge amount of material, but never found the cobalt bird. Although I clearly remembered that in the game they were not rare creatures. Each continent had 7 dungeons ranging from F rank to A rank. Also, the S rank dungeon in which the boss himself lived, and these birds were supposed to be in a D rank dungeon. He understood that nothing could be done about it, and decided to go to the city and find out. Genfrey headed to the main square where he was going to find information and more. He decided to find the shop he needed and find out everything there. Here he noticed the shop he needed and headed towards it. But before he could open the door, someone stopped him very abruptly. And then he noticed some group that was dragging some bags behind their backs. They behaved impudently, pushed Genfrey away, and responded to him in a very unflattering manner. The guy thought they were robbers, and all because they spoke of what was in their bags as loot. They were moving towards the mother and daughter who were going about their business. The mother, having noticed this group, tried in every possible way to protect her daughter from these guys. But the hand of one of this group, more like a gang, they wanted to push the little girl out of the way. The girl was already flying down the stairs and didn't know what she could do. Genfrey, noticing this attitude, rushed to save the little girl from a strong fall and made it at the last second. He couldn't understand this attitude and wanted to know what kind of gang it was. The group noticed the guy's efforts to help this girl. Mother tried to thank Jenfrey for his help, but he says that there is no need to thank him for that. He immediately began to look through the further path of those guys. An unknown merchant appeared next to him, who nicknamed the group the Scum of the Mountain Hounds. It was the owner of the store that the guy was heading to, and he, in turn, explained that this was a new guild that was demanding money from sellers. He also tells the story that this particular group is involved in the disappearance of the cobalt birds. The guy immediately realized that he had received the information he had come for, but unfortunately they have no concept of honor. They were ready for the number of women's children, so many stores were closed. Jenfrey didn't understand this attitude and was shocked. This outcome of events was very bad for everyone who worked in this city. Understanding that a guild is a group of people and he won't be able to stand up to such a number. He had a raging motivation to punch someone in the face due to a personal grudge against these people and the poaching of cobalt birds. He decided that he would definitely not let any of these guys go and decided to catch up with them. Soon he found himself in a place that looked more like a trash can because empty bottles were scattered everywhere. Around the corner, Jenfrey quietly tracked their location. He noticed how they were drinking various drinks and carefully laying out all the loot. Some of them told how they stole something from a nearby store, but also that the master told him to expand his influence. It was indeed a guild of thieves, but the guy was most interested in the feathers of the cobalt bird. Someone was busy distributing everything into carts. Here he noticed noticeable white jars which contained exactly what he needed. It was in these jars that the feathers of the cobalt bird were found. Here Jenfrey realized that it was precisely from these guys that he could not find a single bird. Here they began to discuss the news from the association, because it was reported that some guy killed the 33rd monster in 5 minutes, but many thought that this was empty gossip. The guy was thinking about his plan of action at this time because there were too many of them. Then someone called out to him and asked what he was doing there. It seems that all these guys had a profession of thief. Then a special stealth skill was issued, and it was not surprising that he did not notice the guy behind his back. Jenfrey tried to say that he was just passing by, but the guy who found him repeated the same thing. The guy started making threats because a couple of days ago a spy from another guild said the same thing. At that moment, the thief rushed to attack the guy, but he successfully dodged. Jenfrey realized that these guys were very fast, and for this reason the battle against them would be even more dangerous. But nothing could be done, and he took his weapon from his inventory. The thief was amazed that his attack missed the guy. Jenfrey, in turn, merely tripped him up. After all, he was going to resolve the issue quite peacefully and just watched as the guy fell to the ground. While he was flying, he only hit him on the neck. Here, many of the gang noticed that something had happened and began to look around. They saw one of their partners lying unconscious and an unknown guy standing over him. He tried to explain to him that he was not a spy and did not want to fight. He just needed the feathers of the cobalt bird. But they noticed that he had a weapon in his hand, and then he realized that it was not folding in his direction. The gang thought that their partner was dead, but they didn't ask him if he was following them and asking what he did to their friend. Here he realized that talking to them would not work, which meant that he would have to act the old-fashioned way. But Jenfrey was not so simple and was ready for this battle. One of the thieves rushed at him from behind, but the guy expected this. This alertness allowed Jenfrey to repel the attack at that very moment without causing harm to herself. But he responded to this attack by hitting him in the nose with his weapon. He was simply waiting for a reaction, but the hooligan was only trying to somehow stop the bleeding with his hand. The thief, who thought it would be easy to attack Jenfrey, began to complain that his nose was broken. He immediately asked his question about whether reinforcements would arrive to them and asked not to lie. It was all like a battle of one against an angry crowd, which was very annoying. Jenfrey continued to successfully dodge even the lower attacks, but the guy also launched an attack in response. At the same moment, the second member of the gang tried to attack the guy, but Jenfrey quickly reacted. The attack with a spear was directed in the same way, but he immediately grabbed the weapon, no longer allowing himself to be wounded. And pulling the weapon, he delivered a counterattack to the ribs. But then the system sent 2 notifications informing that Jenfrey had struck a weak point, and because of this, the perception skill had been activated. He immediately tried to apologize to the guys, realizing that most likely it brought incredible pain. But no one was planning to leave him alone, and the third one was already rushing towards him with an axe. The guy easily dodged this attack by simply crouching, and he launched a counterattack aimed at the chin with the handle of his centipede. Jenfrey initially didn't want to fight them for this reason alone. He didn't want to make such a mess, but came to them with only one request. He needed the feathers of the cobalt bird and nothing more. Here the guy noticed something and reacted quickly. An attack was planned on him from behind, but he managed to repel it at the last second. The professional thief who carried out this attack was surprised, because not many can repel such an attack. Jenfrey understood that this attack must have been carried out under the stealth skill. Here he remembered that it was the one who had just attacked him and pushed that little girl. They passed each other and only began to observe each other's actions. The thief said that he was the deputy head of the Mountain Hounds and asked inquiringly whether he knew the name Sabo Masuo. But he had never even heard the name and didn't understand what was so cool about it. Here this thief remembered that Jenfrey had blocked his path before and rushed to attack, and it was clear that it was worth dealing with him earlier. Despite how much they stole, the weapons weren't that good quality. The thief thought that Jenfrey didn't look even 20, but despite this, he was good at fighting. Although I thought that all these merits in the battle were only the merit of good weapons, considering that beginners really are lucky. The deputy of the Hound Gang explained that the weapon is just a trinket and everything depends only on the professional skills of the person himself. Here a blow of enormous force was struck very close to Jenfrey, but it missed him. But since the profession changed, the appearance could immediately tell the profession. He was so clever in informing me that he was asking if he was a potion maker. The thief considered his class to be trash, but seeing the weapon he realized that it was very rare. That was the only reason he could still stand on his feet for a thief. The adventurer thought that the guy had never had such fights before and mocked him a little. Several blades were already ready to attack and hung in the air. By controlling the blades with magic, he thought he could easily force them to retreat. But Jenfrey only had to raise his weapon in the direction and knock down all the blades. The thief said that in battles, the winner is the one who first finds out the opponent's profession. He mockingly said that the only skill he had was synthesis, which would not help him in battle, meaning that the thief won in terms of physical strength. He thought that the profession was unknown to Jenfrey, and for this reason he believed that he had an advantage. The guy was amazed because he saw the use of stealth, and it created dissonance in his head. Here this guy started to justify himself and say that he is actually a summoner, which became funny for the guy because they told him everything themselves. He realized that it would be harder to fight against the thief because they had the stealing skill, and he could lose his centipede. And Jenfrey would be very offended, so there was no time to waste. He was already about to go on the attack. The guy was serious about winning, but then two unknown guys from the same group appeared behind him. Noticing this, he was amazed and could not understand at what point in time all this happened. This was another use of stealth, and they were already rushing towards the guy again. Jenfrey also had gymnast skills, so he easily dodged their attacks. Despite his skills, he had to endure difficulties due to such dodges. But this did not stop him from continuing to attack in response, and she flew to the man's most vulnerable spot. For this thief, the feeling was not so pleasant. The system reported that the blow hit the enemy at its most vulnerable point. A second notification about the activation of the perception skill immediately followed. After the skill was triggered, the reaction did not take long to come. The scream of pain was so loud that it broke a huge number of windows in neighboring buildings. The thief's name was Sabo, and everyone who was worried about his condition immediately tried to wake him up, but he simply lost consciousness from pain shock. Jenfrey tried to apologize and explain that he didn't do it on purpose. But then he realized that despite this, the battle was not over. The guy was already behind the other two members of the group. He reported that if they don't want to end up in this guy's place, there are certain conditions for them. Jenfrey maliciously asked to be given only the feathers of the cobalt bird, and they would remain untouched. The thieves were kneeling in front of their boss who was unconscious and turned to the guy. They saw his very angry face, which did not allow them to doubt his seriousness. Fear penetrated them to the core, and, clarifying what exactly the guy needed, they immediately tried to bring it to him. But behind their backs they could hear the conversations of the rest of the group. Everyone considered Jenfrey a spy for another group and reported that he killed all the guys. He tried to justify himself and explain that they had misunderstood everything. But the group surrounded him in full readiness and had no intention of retreating. One of the hounds mocked him and said that not everyone would do something like that, but the second one noticed and became interested in what was lying there, foaming at the mouth. They realized that it was the deputy head lying there and were shocked. Everyone immediately rushed to him and tried to understand what had happened to him. Sabo was completely knocked out, but no one doubted his strength even after that. The group believed that the deputy lost only because of the alcohol he drank. Jenfrey, with a smile on his face, was sure that Sabo had not been drinking, but was just too confident in himself. Then a question was heard about what was happening in this place, and the whole gang immediately turned around in fear. 3 serious men from the same group were heading towards them, but one walked ahead of everyone and clearly had the greatest share of influence on the gang. Everyone started running to him, realizing that the leader had visited. Many tried to shout down each other and report what was happening in this square. Genfrey just watched and was surprised to meet the head of the guild. He was amazed that someone tried to attack them once again. But everything was not so, although they also reported that Sabo was beaten. The guild leader was clearly aggressive towards the guy, but Genfrey was also ready to fight if it was necessary. He tried to justify the behavior of his subordinates and said that even if they were rude, this was not a reason to beat them. Here the guy was able to speak and say that he was not a member of any guild, which amazed the leader. He found it funny that the guy was able to defeat all of his people on his own. He was bursting with laughter despite the fact that they had been humiliated by a lone adventurer. And then the leader offered to join their team in the most serious way. Genfrey was surprised by this outcome of events and did not understand what he had just heard. They tried to explain to him that under other circumstances he would have been beaten and forced to apologize, but since Sabo was unconscious, he definitely couldn't be missed. Here he decided to hug him, thinking that Genfrey was so happy that he had nothing to say, and then suggested going to a bar and celebrating. He did not understand why, without his consent, he was already recognized as a member of this group. Throwing the head's hand off his shoulder with a slightly rough action, Genfrey explained that he came here only for the cobalt bird's feathers, and never had any desire to join their third-rate guild. And after explaining all this, he asked them to give him the feathers and disperse. The head was amazed at such impudence because no one dares to call them third-rate. Genfrey explained that they are like that, attacking only the weak. They would not be able to provide the slightest competition to the strong. The leader immediately pounced on the guy in a furious attack, but he easily dodged and the attack landed on the stone-paved area. All he had to do was retreat a little, and the axe attack would go in the other direction. While the weapon lay on the square, his eyes filled with blood. A head with great rage and bloodshot eyes. He was most amazed that someone was able to escape his blow. But that doesn't stop him from beating the guy to death and then selling him into slavery. After the blow, Genfrey realized that this man's profession was clearly not a thief. They did not have such crushing force. Immediately after these words, a second blow followed, but the guy immediately jumped back. He had to immediately lie down on the floor as another attack followed. He dodged all attacks perfectly, using gymnastic techniques. Genfrey clearly understood that he did not want to see his professional skills and he needed to be dealt with faster. He immediately headed towards the head of the gang with a targeted attack. Genfrey immediately reacted and dodged another axe attack. Everyone didn't understand how he managed to dodge it every time. He even managed to land an attack aimed at the tailbone. The head was shocked by this outcome of events. No one had ever managed to do this before. What was most surprising was that the attack was delivered with the back of the dagger and yet remained very strong. Genfrey turned around and wondered if his plan had been discovered. The anger overtook the leader so strongly that he decided to use the remove skill, and he lost his axe, putting it in his inventory. Genfrey stopped understanding what was happening and wondered why the weapon had been removed. Here he began to guess what profession it could be, and here he finally heard the name of the skill, namely, Massacre, was the name of the skill that allowed one to receive a huge boost. The skill was passive from the fighter profession. It doubled the strength status for 3 minutes when the weapon was put away. The soldiers were happy and rooted for their commander with all their hearts. Genfrey guessed and was right. At that very second, the leader's fist was already flying at the guy. But he stopped almost in front of the face as if giving time to think. Either Genfrey's reaction helped, or for some reason the leader really didn't have the speed, but the blow hit the wall. The guy understood that if he got hit even once, he would definitely not escape alive. The commander continued to try to attack. He already knew for sure that he wanted to kill Genfrey, but the boy was clearly determined to fight. Genfrey attacked the stomach with one serious blow. The system reported that the attack was carried out on vulnerable points. The system also reported that the perception skill worked. Here, the whole team was shocked by this outcome of events. The guild leader was unconscious and everyone was in an inexplicable state of mind. They started looking at each other and wondering if it was that guy from the news. It said that he was dressed in the basic uniform of a potion maker. The fact that Genfrey had black hair and blue eyes already confirmed the fact that the news was talking about him. Many were shocked, while others were happy to see the news report before their eyes. Genfrey didn't understand why everyone was so shocked. He tried to talk to them, but everyone was so frightened by what he had done to their leader that they ran away from that place in fear. Genfrey couldn't understand how everyone knew his name, but he couldn't ask anymore. Here he realized that for him, there was no difference in this. Now he just wanted to return the goods to the stores and move on. Sigrun Falls was a B-rank dungeon, but Genfrey thought the boss of this dungeon was too weak and uninteresting. The system reported that the boss was level 35 Baphomet, and experience points were awarded. He returned to the angel he had seen in the past, but he was missing the feather from the last meeting. Genfrey stood and looked at the statue of an angel that was twice his height. He greeted the fallen goddess and wondered if he could find out the truth and solve her riddle to get cool stuff. Genfrey decided to return what the goddess had once lost and took the necessary things from the inventory, namely the eye of the Cyclops and the feather of the cobalt bird. He understood that it was not difficult to guess what she was missing. The goddess was just waiting for one of the adventurers to figure it out. Of course, many guessed that the Cyclops' eye had to be inserted into the left eye socket, but few people noticed the gap in one of the wings, which is where the cobalt bird's feather came in handy. The feather was indeed the second missing element. The system reported that the wish of the fallen goddess was fulfilled. Then magic began to happen and the goddess began to glow. Tears flowed from her eyes, symbolizing gratitude. The system also reported immeasurable gratitude to the person who showed such a gesture. A cup appeared in front of him, which could tell him what the second secret weapon would be. A halo appeared above the cup, which was the weapon. It was Lucifer's heavenly halo, which gave luck plus 100 and durability 2000, and also opened the skill of mind reading and the skill of magic sense. The third skill was unlocked under certain conditions, and getting this weapon was definitely not easy. He looked with gratitude at the goddess, who remained in her original pose. Genfrey thanked the goddess for such a beautiful weapon and was happy to receive it. The goddess's soul was calmed with the help of what was missing from what the guy had in his inventory. Here he decided to check how it would look on him, but he thought that it would make him look like a dead man. He decided that he didn't want to stand out too much and felt that he would be considered a weirdo rather than a cool adventurer. Since he now had a halo, he thought he could visit the first S-rank dungeon. But there was one problem, because of which he had to go to a gathering of people who were looking for a guild. Genfrey was not happy that it was impossible to get into dungeons of this level alone. According to the guild rules, only a group of 7 people could enter the S-rank dungeon, namely the Agni Volcanoes. Looking at the lists of adventurers looking for partners, he didn't like the fact that he would have to gather a party. In the game, after clearing an S-rank dungeon, the demon could be erected again, but from a different part of the map. After completing the first dungeon, a title was awarded, which was a direct ticket to the second region. Genfrey wanted to go there as soon as possible, but it was not so easy. Amazing things began to happen behind his back, namely, many noticed a group of fire mages who rarely appeared in such places. The guy also noticed this team and realized that this could be his chance. A team of 6 people from different professions sat waiting for a decision from the commander. The leader of this team was a beautiful girl, Freyna Ashper. She was a level 45 mage, and by profession as a mage at the age of 23, she had achieved great success. Genfrey realized that he had the opportunity to find out what this team was talking about. So he activated the first skill of the Halo, namely, mind reading. The feeling from Freyna was like need. Genfrey stood not far from them and understood that they were at a loss. The team wanted to enter an S-rank dungeon, but they were missing one fighter. The guy immediately realized that his new weapon was definitely worth its price. The commander decided that they would most likely go home today as well. But Genfrey still decided to approach them and distracted them from the conversation with his apology. He asked with a smile on his face to join the group with them and also mentioned that they were missing one player. The team was amazed by Genfrey's appearance as he had a halo above his head. He realized that most likely everyone was laughing at him, namely because of his second weapon. Here, one of the participants interrupted him and said that they had decided not to look for other participants in the group anymore. This guy felt anxiety, namely worry for the wounded fighters of the team. Genfrey realized that their 7th fighter had been wounded in the dungeon earlier, and now they were 1 member short of entering. But he immediately turned his attention to the leader and asked to hear her opinion first. Because Freyna looked very worried about failing to get into the dungeon, he couldn't understand why he was being refused. She interrupted him and said that her concerns were none of his business, and then the system reported that Freyna was actually worried about her father, who had also gone into an S-rank dungeon a month ago, and no one from his group had ever returned. After this, the guy understood what this lady was really worried about. And Genfrey also noted that she was concerned. It was all because there was a halo above his head, which allowed her to be concerned about his health. Genfrey was confused by this, and he decided to introduce himself and say that he really wanted to visit this dungeon. Then one of the team realized that the news was talking about this guy. Everyone on the team, realizing this, was shocked, because all the rumors were true in this case. Genfrey finally understood what was going on and why everyone knew his name. namely that he had been featured in an adventurous news report. Here, Freyna began to suspect that he could read minds, and although she usually did not believe the news, she understood that this guy did not look like an ordinary adventurer. To her, he looked like a man who already knew exactly all the chaos of this world and knew what was what. Freyna felt a sense of trepidation as she looked at Genfrey, and then she announced her decision that she would take him into the team. Her decision was irrefutable, and she immediately stood up from her seat. But she said that if he gets in the way, they will leave him there. Genfrey was happy that he finally managed to get into their team. The team headed to an S-rank dungeon, namely the Agni Volcanoes. In the end, he was put first, which was not the best position. He was tense about this position due to the fact of a collision with a monster, but the girl walked behind. Someone was tense about Genfrey's presence, but there was no trust in him. Freyna asked him not to worry and said that he just needed to be pointed in the right direction. At worst, they would use him as bait. Here, one of the guys asked if Genfrey was really the guy from the news, but since he hadn't heard this news, he couldn't think of anything better to say than no. That guy was not happy with that answer. The system reported that Arthur was confused and did not trust him. The second member of the team asked not to believe the rumors, and also believed that the halo meant nothing. Genfrey was very angry at the thought of looking stupid, but in fact his halo was very useful. Here, a notification appeared in front of the guy that the second skill that could sense magical power had worked, and a suspicious movement had been noticed. The guy realized that all the monsters from the top of the mountain were descending from the top of the mountain. Genfrey immediately realized that he had to act very quickly. He immediately called out to the team's magicians and ordered them to urgently set up protective barriers. Everyone was amazed by this behavior and did not understand why. But he tried to explain that there would be an eruption now. Everyone still couldn't believe Genfrey's words because there was no trust in him. But then an eruption really began, of which there was no doubt. Then the collapse began and the guy tried to hurry everyone up. But the team continued to just stand there. It was too late for the average person to create a barrier. Still, he managed to use reflection magic. Genfrey was amazed that it was raining stones and realized that they would have to wait until everything died down. Freyna ordered everyone to remain in place. She took her staff out of her inventory, and then she began to cast her spell. Meteor Breeze was a very powerful spell. She directed this attack in the same direction from which the stone rain was coming, to remove all these stones and not burden your people. After departure, all the stones began to melt. Everyone was amazed by such power. Genfrey was pleased that she had the element of fire and was able to reflect such a number of stones with such ease. But then a crack appeared in the soil, either from the attacks or for some other unknown reason. The crack went in a huge strip along their entire path. Then something unexpected happened. One of the team screamed, because he didn't expect the crack to go so deep and Arthur to start falling. But they managed to catch him and not let him die. Genfrey was the one who tried to save the guy. The stones under my hand began to slide into the abyss. Genfrey realized that he was starting to fail in the same way. The team just remained to watch what was happening, and the two guys were already flying together into the depths of the crevice. Their fall was very soft, but for what reason? They fell on a representative of the Downy Bat, which was level 38. Genfrey thought it was really luck, but then he realized that his halo added 100+ to his luck. Here she turned to them with obvious displeasure, and the guy realized that it would be best for them to start making their escape from this place of stay. But the bat was clearly on alert and preparing to attack. Genfrey warned that this monster absorbs all attacks and reflects them back at the enemy, so you should be careful. The guy, trembling, warned that he knew this. Here signs of an offensive appeared and the guy warned Arthur about it. He was scared and didn't know what to do. Genfrey had to help him urgently. He grabbed Arthur by the side and tried to drag him away from all the flying stones. The guy had a hard time because of this, as such a fall was not a pleasant one. Genfrey asked him to be even more careful or he would not get out of this place, but would simply die. The monster also did not understand these screams nearby. Here, Arthur noticed a hole that was above his head and realized, if he hadn't been pushed away, he would have turned into a pancake by now. This monster wasn't even S-rank. Here he noticed that some movements began from Genfrey's side and did not understand what it was. Afterwards, Arthur noticed the untouched guy and a bat lying nearby. Here he realized that one attack was enough to kill such a monster. Or was it only enough for Genfrey? The commander tried to find out the vital signs of the two who fell into the abyss. With the help of fire magic, she had such an opportunity. Everyone was interested in Arthur's condition and what was happening in the crevice. The maid of honor reported that the guy from their team was alive and everyone was happy. Her memories of the mysterious guy haunted her, because at first he took risks to save himself. He also knew about the impending earthquake before anyone else. But her thoughts were interrupted by the crowd, who asked whether they would also go down. She said that it would be a waste of effort, since their main goal was to defeat the demons and bring peace to the continent. She also continued that they would move towards the top and meet along the way. She said that Arthur was her brother and he had trained with her, so there was no need to worry about him, although in her heart she prayed that he would return unharmed. The guy told Jenfrey that the squad leader was his sister, and that they went to this dungeon to look for their father. But our hero's plans were much further. Arthur didn't understand where the guy was heading, because they were moving in the opposite direction from the peak where the demon lived. Jenfrey didn't understand whether the guy really wanted to attack such a monster, or whether he just wanted to die. The guy immediately realized what he said and fell silent, and our hero said that he was heading to the monster's lair. The system reported that at the moment he was experiencing conflicting feelings because he wanted to increase his level. Jenfrey amazed him with his intelligence and told him to follow him if Arthur wanted to be stronger. Here they found themselves at the entrance to the cave where all the evil spirits of this world had gathered. The system reported that there were many phoenixes of the 41st and 42nd levels in this place. The level of these monsters was higher than that of the downy bat, but Jenfrey was confident of his victory and was already preparing to attack the monsters. The phoenixes began to attack him, and for now they were moving one at a time. But the same attacks began to become more frequent from behind, because the whole pack noticed and was ready to kill the uninvited guest. Arthur immediately realized that a one-on-one battle would be easily won, but against a pack it would be too difficult. Here the guy noticed an unusual movement behind his back, but he had enough reaction time to jump back from the attack directed at him. But Arthur decided that he would try to help in this battle. Although Phoenix was of a very high level, the guy was determined. The monster was ready to attack and was already flying towards the guy. Arthur immediately realized that he couldn't win in close combat and took another weapon from his inventory. He decided that it would be better for him to take a position further away and shoot at the birds. He shot very well and hit the phoenixes in the throat, which allowed him to level up from a distance. Here Arthur decided to show that if he fought one-on-one, he would definitely not lose. And I decided to check how things were going with Jenfrey, but I didn't expect to see this. A guy was sitting among a mountain of corpses, and something that looked like fire was shining in front of him. He calmly ate the delicious phoenix meat. Arthur was amazed that all the remaining monsters had already been defeated, and the system reported that the meat looked like chicken. At this point, Jenfrey felt unwell and thought that he had overeaten, although he wondered if the meat was giving him any buffs. Here he received a notification that a stream of magical power was approaching. While eating the phoenix meat, he was unhappy that at that very moment another monster began to approach. A larger creature appeared in front of them. This creature looked like a huge fire lizard. Namely, it was a level 45 salamander. Here, Jenfrey realized that for some reason the main boss of the dungeon was here. He was frightened by this outcome of events. Then something unexpected happened, namely, the deterioration of Jenfrey's condition, due to which his statistics also dropped. He asked Arthur to be careful with this monster. After all, this creature increased its statistics by eating people. The salamander prepared to attack with its tail. She threw Arthur into the wall. Jenfrey asked if everything was okay with the guy. It was too much for the guy, and he most likely could not have helped in this situation. He asked Arthur to hide while he dealt with the salamander. Jenfrey was already in front of the monster and was ready to attack or repel attacks. The salamander was acting strangely, and it seems the guy understood what was going on. He found it funny that the monster had stomach problems, namely that nothing fit into it. But it seems everything was not so simple, and it seems the salamander was about to vomit. It was an accurate statement. She made the decision to empty her stomach. A pile of human bones appeared in front of Jenfrey, but he was not surprised. And there was also a sword lying nearby. Arthur was shocked by the weapon he saw. Jenfrey decided that he needed to end this battle quickly. The salamander was even more angry than at the beginning of the battle. Arthur ran to the clothes and sword lying on the ground, realizing that these were his father's things. Here came a notification from the system reporting anger and a desire for revenge coming from the guy. Jenfrey was struck by such emotions. Arthur lost himself and vowed to kill the monster. He rushed into the attack completely without self-control. He was rushing at such a speed that no one would have time to react. Jenfrey tried to stop the guy and asked him not to get into trouble. The salamander's tail was flying towards the guy and he was probably going to have a hard time. The guy flew a meter away from the monster and fell unconscious. Arthur quickly stood up and continued talking about killing him. The salamander was furious. Jenfrey knocked the guy down and was very angry with him. He didn't understand why they couldn't hear him because he simply asked them to wait. Arthur asked to let him go, but they continued to yell at him, saying that such a monster could not be defeated alone. The cries for the family were so loud, and all because they would suffer greatly from the death of a team member and brother. Then finally the guy got the message about Genfrey, and he understood what was going on. But he kept asking to understand that such a monster cannot be defeated one-on-one. Arthur started shouting back and saying that he understood all this, but did not want to back down. He burst into tears and said that he could not help but avenge his father. The guy was angry with himself for his powerlessness. His fists were under enormous tension which began to gradually subside. Genfrey apologized for having to yell and stood up and walked towards the monster. Arthur could not yet come to his senses, but he was no longer eager to fight. While clarifying information about whether the guy was a hunter, he realized that this was not quite the right profession for this dungeon. The guy only had arrows and heals in his inventory, although there was also some downy bat hair, but where did it come from? Genfrey explained that this was possible thanks to a hidden passive skill of his class. Arthur didn't understand what kind of hidden ability this was, but he didn't hear an answer because a plan of action appeared. Here he declared that they would deal with the monster together and that it would be their secret. The guys were very serious about this battle. Even the fearful Arthur was now confident of victory. The salamander was not an easy opponent, and for this reason it would be necessary to resort to cunning. The mood remained victorious on everyone's part. Salamander also had no intention of giving up without a fight. Genfrey asked to buff him. Arthur immediately began to cast a spell, which spoke of help in the battle over the salamander. It looked like secret magic, because all the magic was happening behind Genfrey's back. The system reported that he had been given a buff of combat inspiration by Arthur. The system also reported that the effect would last for 5 minutes, and muscle strength and speed were increased by 30%. The salamander didn't understand what was happening, but was ready to attack. Arthur specified at what point they would use the bat hair. Genfrey thanked me for the buff because it helped the stomach debuff disappear, and told me to act according to the plan. The guy began to quickly reduce the distance from the monster. The salamander was also ready to attack at any moment, or she was ready to open her mouth at any moment and eat her next target. Genfrey understood that due to the monster's large amount of health, he would have to attack for a long period of time. With fast and non-stop attacks, the guy continued to reduce the salamander's health. The monster was poisoned, and the system reported it. Genfrey knew that with the centipede's venom, he could stun her for a couple of seconds. And this will be a good time to attack. The arrow was aimed at the salamander's forehead. Even before this, Genfrey was ready to give a sign to his partner. Turning to Arthur, he indicated to him that there was an opportunity to attack head-on, as this was the monster's weak point. The guy immediately took out the equipment from his inventory. Genfrey was glad that he was not alone, because from a long distance in such a short period, he would not have had time to strike. Arthur was already sending his arrow at the monster. The guy tried to dodge the monster very quickly, and he continued to attack while his partner was aiming. With an indefinite arrow, it seemed like it was possible to hit the salamander's weak spot. It seems they managed to pierce the monster's weak spot after all. But then something unexpected happened, because the salamander only became more aggressive. The system reported that the rage mode was activated, which increased the characteristics by 30%. Arthur, standing behind, even there began to feel the heat emanating from the monster. He was scared and his eyes could barely open because of the boiling water around him. Genfrey, on the contrary, moved only closer to the monster. Everything went according to his plan. Despite the fact that in this mode all statistics increased, he was not tense about such an outcome of events. In this case, he needed the wool of a downy bat. The salamander was heading towards Genfrey with fury. They met in a duel, but this duel was not equal. But the guys were ready for this battle from the very beginning. In this mode, the vulnerable spot changed. Arthur was ready to launch the next attack and was waiting for the order. Genfrey screamed that his front paws had become his weak point. The arrow immediately flew and caught up with the monster. The salamander was also attacked from close range. The system reported that the mind's eye was activated when everything looked like the end of the battle, and joy was already slightly overtaking the guys. But despite the fact that they began to rejoice ahead of time, they did not stop attacking the monster. The salamander also did not fall with signs of death. Arthur tensed up a little, realizing that something was wrong. They stood waiting for a reaction or death from the monster. The salamander's face was covered in wounds. Arrows were sticking out of it, and Genfrey noticed the most important thing. The flames around her have weakened, meaning that she is on the brink of life and death. But if she manages to absorb the surrounding fire, the recovery process will begin. The system reported that the self-resurrection mode was activated, and health began to recover. The monster began to look even more aggressive. Arthur began to worry that she would not be easy to defeat. The guy realized that if they let her recover, they wouldn't be able to defeat the salamander in 5 minutes, and that's why they had to hurry, and Arthur said that now was the time to attack. Jenfrey, standing in front of the monster's face, did not take any action yet. But I was glad when I heard that it was time to start the attack. The guy was pleased that his partner also wanted to finish off this monster as soon as possible. Jenfrey rushed to attack the salamander. The salamander opened its mouth in anticipation of an attack. He knew that the monster's mouth would now open. Jenfrey launched an attack with his centipede. Due to this, the lizard's mouth opened even wider. And one of the main attributes for this attack was already ready, namely bat fur. With a quick movement of his hand, he directed this little lump into the monster's mouth. This was followed by the second step of the attack, namely, Arthur was ready to shoot an arrow straight into the salamander's mouth. He was ready and knew that now was the right time to release the arrow. She was catching up with the fur of the downy bat. Having pierced the fluff, she continued her attack. The arrow flew straight into the salamander's mouth. The guys were just waiting for further reaction, because their plan was a surefire one. Arthur couldn't understand whether they had succeeded or not. But Jenfrey started counting down from 3. The salamander didn't understand what to expect, and the guy continued counting. His face expressed great confidence. Then smoke began to pour out from behind the salamander's mouth. And then there was a huge explosion that tore the salamander's head apart. Jenfrey explained that the fur of the downy bat absorbs damage and then releases it, tripling its power. The buff wore off, but the stomach debuff was removed, and he was just happy that they managed to do it before that happened. The salamander's legs began to give way. A few seconds later, she was simply lying in front of the guys. The system reported that the boss was defeated and experience was gained. Jenfrey was finally able to calm down and was glad that it was over. Arthur stood sadly over the abyss. He had his father's sword in his hands, and the boy decided not to touch it at that moment. Jenfrey was putting something away in his inventory. Then a team appeared and called Arthur. The sister was glad to see him, but he said he had bad news for them. The lady-in-waiting noticed her father's sword in the boy's hands and already understood what they were going to talk about. She couldn't believe it. Arthur also couldn't get a word out of himself, but he said that he was spat out by a salamander. The girl simply hugged him, understanding how much pain it was. The maid of honor tried to calm the guy down and explained to him that it was no one's fault. They did everything they could. But Arthur also said here that Jenfrey had done a lot and that the credit for the victory was not his. The whole team glanced at him, but he didn't even notice it right away. The guy was burying something in the ground and not paying attention to the team's conversations. The defeat on the boys' faces was enormous. They couldn't believe what was said on the news was true. Jenfrey continued to do the same thing, and his attention was focused only on the matter. Many of the team decided to help him, but only the brother and sister realized that he was making a grave for their father to honor his memory. They left some flowers and a sword that their loved one treasured. Arthur and the maid of honor also decided to pray before leaving. Jenfrey remained nearby at this time, but he did not prevent those who knew this man from saying goodbye. He also felt sad at heart for the guys who went to look for their father and hoped that he was alive. Looking at this couple, his thoughts began to take him into a whirlpool. He remembered how they used to sit at home with his sister and wait for their parents, but one day, my mother came running home completely confused. Jenfrey almost remembered their conversation, but something distracted him, namely, it was the maid of honor who thanked him for his father and Arthur, as well as for helping the entire team. He tried to explain that there was nothing supernatural in his actions and the guy could have defended himself. But Arthur stood up for himself by saying that he didn't look like an idiot, and if it weren't for help, he wouldn't be alive anymore. Watching Jenfrey the whole time, he realized that the guy was actually much stronger than they said. The whole team couldn't believe Arthur's words. But Jenfrey interrupted everyone by saying that the biggest problem awaited them further on. It was at the top of the mountain that the monster